Ethan Ward thought it would be just another frozen night in the quiet town of Winter Hollow, but the snowstorm told a different story. Under a flickering streetlight, a single snowflake drifted sideways, just enough for him to notice the nightmare ahead. Four men were viciously beating a 68-year-old veteran, Harold Mason, in the middle of an empty road buried in white. The moment Ethan shouted, the attackers scattered into the dark like feral wolves,
Leave him alone
all
right
except
now!
one, because
Go!
Atlas, his 5-year-old German shepherd, had already launched through the storm, clamping onto the arm of the man holding a metal rod. What Ethan didn't know was that this violent night would spark a chain of events hidden beneath the snow, a deeper conspiracy, a trail of footprints through the industrial district, and a truth that would drag Winter Hollow out of silence and into the light. What happens next may break your heart and restore your faith in justice and the quiet miracles that still walk among us. Before we begin, please like the video, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support truly means the world to us. Shadows. In the winter of Winter Hollow, snow drifted through the narrow streets of Winter Hollow, turning every rooftop and shuttered shop into a pale silhouette trembling beneath the Montana wind. Harold Mason, 68, pushed forward through the storm with the slow, stubborn steps of a man who had spent a lifetime walking against harder winds than this. His wool coat, an old military green relic from decades past, hung loosely on his thin shoulders. Age had carved deep lines around his eyes, and his once strong gait had softened into a limp after years of arthritis and a hip injury he never bothered to treat properly. His hair, white and uncombed, fluttered under the flickering street lamp. Still, Harold carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had endured many dark nights and survived them all. Every evening, he walked the same path home from Murphy's Diner, where the owner set aside a discounted meal for him. A sandwich, soup, and a little treat he saved for the stray cats behind his cabin. He always hummed on the walk back, tonight a lonely tune about soldiers who never came home. It comforted him, even when the cold bit into his bones. But as he turned into the narrow alley near the abandoned post office, the humming died in his throat. Four men stepped from the shadows. The first was Brandon Pike, 32, towering over the others with a shaved head that gleamed under the streetlight. A thick jaw and patchy beard gave him a wolfish look, and his narrowed eyes burned with the arrogance of someone who had tasted power too young and too easily. He wasn't just violent, he enjoyed being feared. Beside him slouched Mason Mace Turner, a wiry man whose thin lips were stained purple from cigarettes left hanging there since sunrise. His movements were twitchy, jerky, his pale eyes darted with the raw, unpredictable energy of a starving animal. Jared Ross, broader than the rest, had the kind of muscular build that came from a life of hauling crates, not gyms. A jagged scar cut across his left cheek, an old fight he still bragged about, and his heavy hands curled into fists as if itching for an excuse. Kyle Doon, barely 20, hovered at the back. His face was gaunt, eyes shadowed, and though his hands trembled, there was a glint of cruelty simmering beneath his fear. He was the kind who followed monsters because being near them made him feel like one. Harold's chest tightened. Brandon stepped closer, his breath fogging the air, voice low and taunting. "Remember us, old man? The night you stuck your nose in our business, when we were teaching that bar kid a lesson?" Harold swallowed, steadying himself, though pain crept through his hip like fire. "You were hurting him," he said, voice hoarse but unwavering. "And you will not do that while I'm around." Brandon's smile spread, slow and poisonous. "That's so." The first punch hit Harold's ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. The second came from Jared, sending him stumbling backward. Mace grabbed his coat, ripping it open as Kyle kicked the back of Harold's leg, forcing him onto one knee. They surrounded him, raining blows with the vicious rhythm of men who thought no one was watching. Harold's vision blurred. He tasted blood. He clung to consciousness only because he refused to die in front of men who had never known real battle. His mind drifted, to his friends long gone, to the nights he fought in a different jungle, to promises he made to ghosts he still carried. Jared kicked him again. Brandon lifted an iron pipe, ready to swing it down. Harold braced for impact. Then, a sharp, low bark rolled through the alley. Not loud, not frantic, but commanding, like a line drawn in the snow by someone who would kill before letting it be crossed. At the far end of the street, through the veil of falling snow, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a deliberate calm that instantly unsettled the four attackers. Ethan Ward, 40, stepped into the halo of the street lamp. His winter navy coat, long and worn from years of field use, fluttered slightly in the wind. Beneath it, his red and black flannel shirt clung to his solid frame. His jeans were faded, boots scuffed from countless miles. A simple black knit cap sat on his head, the small U.S. Navy veteran pin catching a faint glint. His face was angular, framed by a short, neatly kept beard, peppered with early gray at the temples. His dark brown eyes, usually gentle, now burned with an unmistakable edge, one forged in years of war and sharpened by memories he rarely allowed to surface. His left leg moved stiffly. An injury from a deployment years ago still haunted him. Beside him walked Atlas, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a muscular frame and black-tan coat dusted by snow. The dog's amber eyes were fiercely alert, ears high, body coiled with controlled power. His harness gleamed under the dim light. "Service dog, do not pet." Ethan paused, assessing the scene with chilling precision. His breath fogged calmly. His fists didn't clench. He didn't shout, but something in his stillness made the alley feel smaller, colder, dangerous. Atlas stepped forward, chested low, a quiet rumble building in his throat. Brandon's grip on the pipe faltered. Harold, struggling to keep consciousness, lifted his eyes and saw the silhouette, tall, steady, unshakable, cutting through the storm like an answered prayer. But Ethan was still too far, and Harold was slipping. The world dimmed around him as the snow fell harder, and the last thing he saw was the Navy SEAL's eyes flickering like a spark ready to ignite. Whether Ethan would reach him in time, no one could yet tell. The echo of footsteps in the snow drifted heavier over Winter Hollow. The moment Ethan Ward lunged forward, boots crushing through the icy surface, as if breaking a warning drum beneath him. His breath came cold and even, years of Navy SEAL conditioning smoothing fear into focus. Atlas sprinted ahead, a streak of black and tan slicing through the whiteout, his paws barely sinking into the snow. The dog's muscles rippled beneath his service harness, and every sound in the alley tuned sharply into his ears. When Ethan reached Harold, the old veteran was barely conscious, his breath rattling in shallow bursts. Blood pooled beneath the snow, melting little crimson wells that refroze immediately. Ethan crouched, pressing 2 fingers to Harold's neck, a pulse, weak but present. Harold's eyes fluttered. He whispered, "Don't chase them, son. They're not just thugs." Ethan tightened his jaw. He recognized the tone, the strained whisper of a soldier who had seen the wrong faces return in the dark. Behind him, Brandon Pike cursed as he and the remaining 3 thugs scrambled down the alley, boots sliding over frozen asphalt. They disappeared into the industrial sector, the abandoned mills where even light refused to linger. Ethan had the instinct to pursue, driven by muscle memory, but the sight of Harold's trembling hands stopped him. For a moment, Ethan was no longer in Winter Hollow. He saw a different night, hot desert wind, bullets carving air, a teammate bleeding out under his hands. He had chosen to pursue the enemy then, and his friend had died before he returned. Never again. Ethan slid off his coat and wrapped it around Harold, lifting him carefully. Atlas circled anxiously, whining once before settling beside them like a sentinel. A car approached, the flicker of headlights in the storm. The figure that stepped out was a middle-aged woman with a round face and steel-gray hair tied back in a loose bun. Her name tag read Linda Cooper, a local nurse who worked nights at the Winter Hollow Clinic. She had stopped her car only because she saw Atlas sitting in the road, blocking her path with eerie intelligence. Linda rushed over, breath puffing into clouds. "My God, Harold?" she gasped, hands trembling as she touched his cold cheek. Linda was known in town as the woman who never slept, always taking extra shifts, always checking on the elderly. Tonight, her soft eyes flashed with something fierce, fear mixed with anger. "We need to move now," she said. "His temperature is dropping." Ethan lifted Harold in his arms, gentle yet firm, his injured left knee pulsing fire up his leg, but he didn't let it show. Former SEALs didn't. As Linda held open the clinic's back door, she glanced at Ethan. "You came just in time," she murmured, but Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed somewhere beyond the swirling snow, beyond the dark streets where Brandon Pike and his pack had vanished. Some men hunted for power, some hunted for fear. Tonight, Ethan felt hunted himself, not by the thugs, but by the memory of every life he'd failed to save. Inside the clinic lights, Harold's breathing grew shallow again. The night had only begun. The warehouse of ash and shadows, an unforgiving dawn broke over Winter Hollow the next morning, painting the snow a soft pink that belied the violence buried beneath it. Ethan stood outside the clinic with Atlas beside him, steam curling from the dog's breath. Harold was alive, stable, though bruised nearly to the bone. But in the brief moments Harold was conscious, he had whispered something that Ethan couldn't ignore. They work for someone meaner than them. So Ethan followed the clues. He traced the direction of the footprints from the alley, noting their spread, the heavier stride of Brandon Pike, the nervous stagger of Kyle, the dragging step of Jared's left boot. They all led toward the industrial quarter, where a row of old lumber warehouses stood silent like abandoned fortresses. Atlas sniffed the air, moving with slow, deliberate precision. His tail stiffened. The dog stopped at the largest warehouse, its doors half broken, its windows clouded with frost. Ethan pushed the door open, and a sharp scent hit him immediately. Cold gasoline, rotten wood, iron, and something metallic beneath it all, something like old blood. Inside, the place was a graveyard of machinery. Rusted saws, chains, stacked boards, and oil drums with peeling labels. But what drew Ethan's attention was a cluster of footprints circling a smashed crate. As he approached, voices drifted from deeper inside. He pressed against the wall as two silhouettes emerged. Derek Boone, early 40s, tall but hunched forward like a man used to skulking in shadows. His hair was greasy, falling over a gaunt face with darting eyes. A former mill guard turned petty criminal, a man too weak to lead, but too cruel to stay forgotten. Beside him stood Kyle Doone, shivering in a patched hoodie, eyes red from a night without sleep. Kyle's voice cracked. "Brandon said the old man's not dead. What do we do if he talks?" Derek lit a cigarette, smoke curling upward. "Then we finish the job. Tonight." Ethan's jaw hardened. Atlas growled low, almost imperceptibly, but then Ethan stepped backward, and his boot pressed against a loose plank. It cracked. Kyle jerked his head up. "You hear that?" Derek squinted toward the shadows. Ethan grabbed Atlas's harness. Time to leave. He slipped out the side door, disappearing into the winter glare just as the men stepped forward, suspicious but not certain enough to follow. For now. Ethan paused after crossing the snowfield. The wind stung his face, but his mind was sharper than ever. Brandon's gang wasn't acting alone. There was someone behind them, someone giving orders, and tonight they were planning to kill Harold. Ethan whispered to Atlas, "We're running out of time." The dog responded with a soft bark, one filled with warning and loyalty. The storm was coming. The night the river stopped breathing, Winter Hollow grew darker that evening, as though the sky itself sensed what was about to unfold. Snow flurried down in aggressive sheets, swirling against the street lamps like frantic ghosts. Ethan didn't wait for police. He didn't trust them, not after Harold hinted someone bigger controlled the thugs. And Winter Hollow's sheriff had a reputation for selective blindness. Ethan headed straight to the riverbank, where he suspected the gang would strike. The Blackwater River was half frozen, large patches of thin ice reflecting the pale moon like fractured mirrors. Atlas moved beside him, hackles raised. Suddenly, a muffled shout. Ethan broke into a run, knee throbbing with each desperate stride. On the riverbank, illuminated by a single lantern, Brandon Pike held Harold by the collar. The old veteran looked barely conscious, dragged along the snow like a broken memory. Jared and Mace flanked Brandon, shuffling nervously on the ice. Kyle stood farther back, arms trembling. Brandon sneered. "Thought you'd die last night, old man. Guess we gotta try harder." Ethan stepped into the lantern light. "Let him go." Brandon froze, pipe in hand. "You again?" Ethan's voice stayed steady, deadly calm. "You're done." Mace lifted a knife. Jared cracked his knuckles. Kyle muttered, "He's got the dog. We should go." Too late. Atlas lunged, slamming Jared into the snow with a roar of unleashed fury. Ethan dashed toward Brandon, just as the thug dragged Harold toward the thin ice. The surface groaned beneath them. Brandon swung. Ethan dodged, barely, feeling the wind of the metal pipe graze past his cheek. The fight was brutal, cold, and desperate, Ethan's injured knee nearly collapsing as they struggled. Brandon was strong, fueled by panic, and something close to madness. He forced Ethan backward toward the river. Atlas barked, frantic. The ice cracked. Harold slipped. Ethan grabbed him by the coat, muscles screaming. Brandon raised the pipe again. Atlas launched himself like a missile. Brandon hit the ice hard, the pipe skidding away. Ethan, gasping, dragged Harold to safety. collapsing onto the snowy bank as the last of the gang scattered into the dark. Sirens approached at last, too late to matter. The only thing that mattered was this: Harold was alive. A town wakes to its own reflection. The next 2 days unfolded with a fragile, almost ceremonial quiet. Word spread fast through Winter Hollow about the assault, the rescue, the thugs fleeing into the woods, and the ex-SEAL who refused to let an old veteran die alone. Harold recovered slowly. His face remained bruised, but the clarity in his eyes returned, and every time he saw Ethan standing at the foot of his bed, he smiled like someone seeing hope instead of snow for the first time in years. The sheriff finally acted, mostly because the town demanded it. Brandon Pike and the others were captured trying to cross the county line. Derek Boone found hiding beneath the mill floorboards. Winter Hollow began to breathe again. On the fourth morning after the incident, Harold stepped outside the clinic on shaky legs. Ethan walked beside him, Atlas trotting proudly, chest puffed out as though he knew the town whispered his name with gratitude. Harold looked at Ethan, eyes soft. "You saved me, son." Ethan shook his head. "You fought as long as you could. I just showed up when you needed someone." Harold smiled gently. "That alone is a miracle." Snow fell again, softly, covering the scars on the road, the footprints, the broken ice on the riverbank. But Winter Hollow felt different now, more awake, more willing to speak up, more alive. Ethan adjusted Atlas's harness. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you home." And together, the three walked through the snow. A scarred veteran, a wounded warrior, and a loyal dog, leaving behind the shadows that once ruled Winter Hollow. The storm had passed, the town had awakened, and hope, fragile but shining, walked at their heels. In the quiet snow of Winter Hollow, when darkness felt heavier than the cold itself, hope didn't arrive with thunder. It came softly, through the footsteps of a Navy SEAL, the heartbeat of a loyal dog, and the courage of an old veteran who refused to let evil win. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles wrapped in blinding light. Sometimes he sends them disguised as ordinary people, a neighbor who steps in, a stranger who chooses kindness, a friend who refuses to look away. And maybe that's the real miracle, that in a world full of noise, God still whispers to the hearts willing to listen. As you go through your own everyday battles, the quiet ones nobody sees, the heavy ones you carry alone, may you remember this: God still moves. God still protects. God still sends help at the perfect moment. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and let us know how God has worked in your life. And if you believe that he still watches over us, type Amen in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story of hope, courage, and God's grace. May the Lord bless you, protect your family, and guide your steps, today and always.